the geographical fate of pandemics. A pandemic, the prevalence of an infectious disease across the world, has an innate geography. Specific geographical processes are involved in both the outbreak of an infectious disease and its potential spread into a pandemic. Emergent infectious diseases almost always have environmental and social causes that can be traced to the disruption of natural ecosystems where pathogens, bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms that cause disease habitually live. Specifically, certain kinds of human activity in environments previously undisturbed, agricultural and urban development, the overexploitation of natural reserves, and the intrusion and forced transfer of animal habitats unleash the potential for the jump of pathogens from animals to humans, known as zoonotic leaps. The likelihood of a new infectious disease becoming a pandemic has increased with the globalization of transportation and trade. Furthermore, the preventative mass treatment of stock animals by global agribusiness with antibiotics is yielding antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And the era of global warming might well be altering the spatial range of certain vectors or transmitters of disease, notably mosquitoes and ticks. Simply put, pandemics and geographical change go hand in hand. Previous pandemics include the Black Death, commencing around 1334, spreading from China along the trade routes to Constantinople, Florence, and other European capitals, and reducing the population of Europe by 25 to 50%. Yellow fever most probably entered Brazil in the 17th century via slave ships from West Africa, which brought slave labourers to work the sugar plantations. The 1918 Spanish influenza, an influenza so called as Spain did not, unlike other countries, censor news of this disease, can be traced to the training camps of tens of thousands of young soldiers on the eastern coast of the United States during the First World War, and their journey from there into Europe, including to northern France, where the mixing with soldiers from other parts of the world all in all unleashed an exceptionally deadly pandemic, with a worldwide death toll of 50 million. From possibly just one human exposure in southeastern Cameroon by 1908, through the new transportation routes of the colonial era of the Belgian Congo, HIV/AIDS made its way into and later out of the capital Kinshasa. Around 1966, HIV/AIDS travels from Kinshasa to Haiti, and in and around 1969 from Haiti to the United States. The first cases of HIV/AIDS that were officially reported were reported in 1981 in the United States. From there, the disease becomes a pandemic. In the fate of pandemics, former geographical dead ends are overcome, they're transcended, and new pathways are found. This process has been aided by either international warfare, as in the case of Spanish influenza, or more often by the globalization of trade and transportation routes by businesses and nation states in the search for more and more profit. The outbreak of SARS coronavirus 2 or COVID-19 follows an escalation of recent epidemics and proto-pandemics, outbreaks and localized spreads that had the potential to become a deadly pandemic, notably H5N1 or bird flu, sudden acute respiratory syndrome or SARS, Middle East respiratory syndrome or MERS, H1N1 or swine flu, Ebola and Zika. We are not currently experiencing a pandemic, the geographer Mike Davis pronounces. We are living in an age of pandemics. The geographer Rob Wallace explains this trend of escalating pandemics as the consequence of interrelated changes in economic geography and ecological geographies, a widening circuit of agricultural production, consumption and exchange that is pushing deeper into forests and back out into cities, with subsequent changes in the ecologies of host species that historically would have been confined to the deep forests, which are now transported to urban regions with high concentrations of human bodies. Traversing a globally integrated air traffic network, pathogens previously not on the global stage are being brought to it. While in the 16th century it took several weeks for smallpox, measles and other old world pathogens to reach the New World, and even longer for the vectors of diseases like yellow fever to be established in the Americas, today international jet travel means that an emerging virus can be in any country or continent on the globe within 72 hours. I turn now to what has been coined the millennium's first jet set disease, SARS. In the period in China since 1979, known as Opening and Reform, the Chinese Communist Party has overseen the entry of foreign business and capital into the country. Through the 1980s, especially the 1990s and into the early millennium, China has experienced a staggering pace and degree of economic growth and urbanisation. Guangdong, a coastal province in southern China, has been at the centre of this rapid economic transformation. Home to the earliest special economic zones and to the Pearl River Delta Economic Zone, Guangdong is now the largest provincial regional economy and population in China, with two global megacities, Guangzhou, its capital, and Shenzhen. This change has driven two ecological effects: the development of industrial-scale poultry farms to supply Guangdong's huge labour force, and the move of smaller livestock producers and rice farmers towards fattening domestic chickens and ducks to sell in the so-called wet markets that exist on the edges of Guangdong's urban areas. Wet markets are markets that, along with fruit and vegetables, stock live animals for slaughter as fresh meat and fish. Mike Davis explains the significance of this. Thanks especially to the prevalence of wet markets in the cities, the urbanisation of Guangdong has probably intensified rather than decreased microbial traffic between humans and animals. As income has risen with industrial employment, the population is eating more meat and less rice and vegetables. An extraordinary concentration of poultry coexists with high human densities, large numbers of pigs and ubiquitous wild birds. Moreover, as the urban footprint has expanded and farm acreage has contracted, a fractal pattern of garden plots next to dormitories and factories has brought urban population and livestock together in more intimate contact. Guangdong is also a huge market for wild meat. The wild meat market and wild animal trade of southern China are an outcome of the economic boom and related geographical change, as Carl Taro Greenfeld explains. The nickname Era of Wild Flavour perfectly evoked the social, economic and psychic dislocations brought on by this greatest mass urbanisation in the history of the world, which coincided with, or perhaps catalysed, one of the most vertiginous economic booms the planet had ever seen. The prevailing philosophy, the business model of more is good and cheaper is best, became the mantra of the era of wild flavour. And they spent it on wild flavour, yue, a key element of China's new conspicuous consumption. To supply Guangdong's wet markets to meet the demand of an expanding affluent class that are frequenting the wild flavour restaurants of the province's cities, there has been an increase in the volume of wild animal trade, with greater cross-border commerce, both legal and illegal, from other Southeast Asian countries, Vietnam and Laos, for example, into southern China, and a rise in captive bred animals on unregulated small farms. It should be of no surprise then that a wet market in Guangzhou was the source of the zoonotic leap of SARS in 2002, and a wet market in Wuhan, Hubei province in south-central China, the most likely source of the spillover of SARS coronavirus 2 in 2019. SARS was first identified by the World Health Organization in February 2003, and it subsequently spread to 4 other countries. Notably, it was the first severe and readily transmissible new disease to emerge in the 21st century, and showed a clear capacity to spread along the routes of international air travel. These geographical conditions are what Mike Davis in 2005 coined the monster at our door, and in light of SARS coronavirus 2, states as the entirely familiar monster that has now walked through our front door. In sum, super urbanising animal populations by factory farming is artificially creating the optimal, the prime conditions for the emergence of newly infectious diseases, speeding up the evolution of new strains and guaranteeing the advent of pandemics. An article from the Chinese Chuang Journal argues that emergent infectious diseases arising in and out of China are best understood through the wider economic geography of capitalism, specifically the evolutionary pressure cooker of capitalist agriculture and urbanisation. Having narrated a story about SARS and its emergence from China, I want to warn against geographically limiting one's attention to only certain parts of the world when thinking about pandemic threat. Local conditions of existence intersect with a global economy to shape disease evolution. As Evan Eskew and Colin Carlson note, due to globalisation, industrial agriculture and the ubiquity of viral biodiversity, a pandemic can emerge practically anywhere. The 2009 H1N1 influenza pandemic, for example, originated from a pig farm in the United States. The conclusion I want to make resonates with an observation made by the philosopher Karl Marx. Capital, profit making more profit, by its nature drives beyond every spatial barrier. Thus, the creation of the physical conditions of exchange, of the means of communication and transport, the annihilation of space by time, becomes an extraordinary necessity for it. Because capital, profit searching out more and more profit, cannot tolerate geographical limits, more and more incursions occur into natural ecosystems that shake the virosphere and dislodge and unleash new infectious diseases, and former pathogen dead ends are increasingly overcome by new pathogen pathways which hitch a lift on trade and transportation routes. Simply put, globalisation, driven by economic change, has altered the rules of what Stephen Morse calls viral traffic. So, how should geographers respond to this age of pandemics? Should our response be based on anti-globalisation and localism, on the presumption that globalisation is to blame? Or should we be for an alternative kind of globalisation based on global cooperation and citizenship and collective care for planet Earth? That's the debate that I hope you will have. Thanks for listening and take care.